Hey guys, so today we're going to start our notes for biological macromolecules. They're on this page, and as I promised, as we go through the first few lectures, I'm going to take notes alongside you so that you know what is going on. Remember, I encourage as many colors as possible for the sake of my time trying to get this video done. I'm just going to be using a black pen, red pen, or a different color for all of your different questions that you may have. I won't be writing in red pen because I am teaching it, so hopefully I don't have too many questions. And then you're going to need a highlighter to go back through and highlight the important ideas. So we're going to run through the first few slides, and then I'll come back here and show you how it looks all written out in the notes. Remember as well that I will say things that are not just on the slide. And a lot of those ideas that I say are going to help you understand what everything means. So write those things down as well. And then when we come back and cover a kind of review and summary in class, you're going to want to write down additional information that you hear that helps make everything make sense. So we're starting out with a pretty intense topic, biological macromolecules. Two really big sounding words, but we're going to break them down. So remember, biology is just the study of living things. So when we say biological, we're talking about living organisms, and macromolecules are the topic we're studying. So there's going to be 4 main biological macromolecules, and without these macromolecules, no living thing can function. So we're starting out as small as we can this year, and then we're going to be moving up into whole organisms and animals and how they interact in the world. But we have to see where all of that comes from and how essentially everything is the same. So macromolecules are an essential part to us being able to not only be alive and thriving, but also to function in several different ways. Let me just go ahead and show you. So the first word that we're going to go ahead and define is organic molecule. And an organic molecule is something that contains carbon. So if you remember back periodic table, carbon is one of our basic elements. It's really abundant in the universe. And because it's abundant naturally and in nature, they typically make up our organic or natural molecules. And then macromolecules are just large organic molecules. So you can see this picture here. It's a macromolecule and it's all kind of crazy looking. But these are molecules that are used by living things to do several main functions. So they're going to store genetic information, store energy, and they're also going to be a source of energy. So without macromolecules, we don't have genetic information to pass on, which is one of our characteristics of life. Macromolecules also help us store energy, which is really important because if you don't store energy and you lose it all as soon as you get it, then you have to be eating all the time. And then they are also our source of energy, so they are also our food. Okay, so then we need to talk about monomer and polymers. And the reason is that our macromolecules are usually going to be polymers. And polymer, if you look at our Latin roots, poly means many and mono means one. So macromolecules are our poly or many monomers put together, which sounds a little confusing, but let's try run through it. So your monomers are your small and basic unit, kind of like one brick when you're looking at an entire wall or one Lego. Then your polymers are bigger and more complicated structures that are made all of monomers. So our macromolecules are the many monomers put together. So they're polymers. All right, so here's what I have written down for the notes so far. I have our definition for organic molecule, our definition for macromolecules, including the 3 things that macromolecules are in charge of, our definition for monomers, and really here I just want to remember that mono equals 1 because that's going to help me when it comes down to polymers. And for polymers, instead of remembering it's a complex structure made of monomers, I put down here that a polymer is many monomers. Now, while I'm showing you these, remember that one of the first things you need to do when you take notes in my class is make sure you are copying down the information on the slide. So while I'm telling you that mono equals 1 is probably the more important piece I want you to remember, you should still be writing down small basic unit as well. All right, so let's talk types of, here we go. Let's talk types of macromolecules. Remember, I said there are 4 macromolecules that we're going to talk about. We've got our carbohydrates, our lipids, proteins, and then our nucleic acids. Now, these are all essential for living things. All living things. It doesn't matter what it is. Every type of living thing needs carbs, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So let's run through what each of them do and how they're important to us. So let's talk carbohydrates first. This is kind of one of my favorites because I think it's so easily recognizable. So the main function or the main reason we need carbs is that it's short-term energy. So think about it if you are an athlete and you have like a tournament coming up and it's going to be an all-day, I used to play soccer, so we'll say soccer tournament. And you need to make sure that you are all fueled up for that day. What we used to do is we would have spaghetti dinners the night before. And I never really understood that until you think about it in terms of the fact that it's short-term energy, meaning it's really easy for our body to access that energy and use it. So if you're going to be exerting yourself, then you're going to want to carb load or fuel up on this short-term and easily accessible energy. Some other uses for carbs is it's used as a structure and a support in our cells. Oops. Let me move me real fast. And carbs are typically found in sugar and in starch. So the pasta you see there, there's sugar cubes, bananas, and most fruit are high in natural sugars. And then there's also potatoes. Ooh. Come on. So we have 2 types of carbohydrates that we're going to talk about. There we go. So our monomer, remember our single brick of carbohydrates, is called a monosaccharide. And I know that sounds really complicated, but that just means that it's a single sugar molecule, one single molecule of sugar. Now, if you had just one single molecule of sugar, it's not going to do a whole lot for you. So typically, we will have polymers, which are called polysaccharides, and these are larger forms of combined versions of our single sugar molecules. So you have a bunch of sugar molecules all connecting together, and those are going to be your starch and your cellulose, which is your fiber, and they're just made up of all those little pieces of glucose and fructose, which you've probably heard a lot about when people talk about eating healthy. They want you to really avoid glucose and fructose. However, some forms of it are really essential for us. And our energy storage of carbs, because remember, we want to be able to store and use energy quickly when we consume carbs. You get 4 calories to burn per milligram of carbs that you take in. So you have to think a calorie is actually a unit of measurement for how much heat it takes to melt a 1 centimeter cube of ice, I believe. I'll have to relook up that number. Might be 1 millimeter cube. Anyway, so you are getting your body 4 calories that you can use up per milligram. Now you have to think there's also a base number of calories that our bodies need every day just to function, just to keep our organs running, just to keep our body temperature regulated, to make sure that you don't get that brain fog. So 4 calories per milligram is a really great number when you're trying to make sure you have enough energy for the day. And because it's short-term energy, remember our carbs are something that we can get to easily and access that energy, your body is going to use it first when it needs energy to get, because it takes a lot less work than some of the other things we're going to talk about. So short-term energy in your body is always going to go to carbs first. So if you eat a bunch of bread and then go work out, you're probably burning off the calories from that bread. All right, so let's look at how I wrote down the notes for this section. Now, there is a lot of information and not a ton of space. So if you need to, feel free to add some notes over here on the side and just make sure you're pointing to the area that you want to put it in. All of this information is pretty important to know. However, I really want you to focus on the highlighted areas. So monosaccharide. If I ask you what a monosaccharide is, I want you to realize that it's one sugar. Another easy way to remember that is that we have our mono, which is one, and then saccharide, which is a really weird word that I will never ask you to spell correctly. Next letter is S, and that starts with sugar. So one sugar monosaccharide. And so up next are lipids. Now, you've probably not heard the word lipid before, but you definitely know what they are. So the main function of our lipids are long-term energy storage. So while carbs are really quick release and really easy for our body to break down and use, lipids, it takes a little bit more effort for our body to get to that because it's stored away for later use. So while long-term storage is the main function, other uses are cushioning our organs, insulation, hormones are made up of lipids, and then also our cell membrane uses lipids a lot. So if you've probably guessed, lipids are essentially fats. So while you are building up a nice cushion for your organs and insulation for when it gets cold, that's actually storing long-term energy for your body to access later. Again, though, it is very useful to have lipids in your diet, so please do not cut them out. If you cut out one of the 4 macromolecules, you technically aren't a living thing, and that's not really great. So these are found in fats, oils, phospholipids, which are in the cell membrane, and then also in steroids. So if you are struggling, maybe you are asthmatic, and you take a steroid every day to help your muscles and help your body have more of that long-term energy to keep your throat from constricting on you. All right, so lipids were a really quick and easy slide so far. Before I turn the page, I want to just show you this. So I've got my main function and purpose, other uses. Insulation, I feel like really tells me what it's doing, and that's where it's storing the long-term energy. And fats and oils are the things that I'm really going to recognize that they're found in. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about how lipids are formed. So we have our monomer, which is our fatty acid, and you've probably heard that term before. And remember, our monomer is our single version. So we can have these saturated or these unsaturated fatty acids. And really what that means is our unsaturated has like a little kink in it. And then our polymers, so our combinations of lots and lots of fatty acid molecules, our fats, oils, our phospholipids, and our steroids and hormones, which should sound familiar because that is where our lipids are found. Then for our energy storage of lipids, lipids actually carry 9 calories per milligram, which is awesome. That means that these fats and oils are giving you a ton of energy. But remember, it's harder for our body to access. So when your body uses lipids, it's because it's run out of carbs. It's going to go to carbs first and then lipids to make sure it's breaking down the right energy and using itself well. Okay, in your notes, you're going to notice that we are going to be skipping phospholipids for right now. We will talk about that more in class, but for the purposes of this lecture, go ahead and skip down to proteins. Now, I'm sure you guys have all heard of proteins before. It's the most diverse macromolecule and the most abundant. So about 50% of the cells in your body, of which there are trillions, so about 50% of you is made up of proteins. Proteins are so important. They literally run your body. So proteins have a ton of different functions. They are literally running your body in so many different ways. So I'm just going to list a few of them here. But enzymes are a form of protein that control the rate of chemical reactions. We're going to do a lot with enzymes later on. Hormones are going to regulate your cell processes. So an example of a protein hormone is insulin. And that's something that most people who are diabetic have to really look after. They're used to form your bones and your muscles, which I would argue is, pretty important. Then they transport substances in and out of the cells. So hemoglobin is an example of that type of protein, and that is found in your blood. Antibodies are proteins that help fight diseases. And then you also have proteins as a food source. So proteins are found in meat, nuts, Greek yogurt, all those sorts of things. And the examples in your body are going to be hemoglobin and insulin. The monomer, so the single piece of a protein, is called an amino acid. Amino acids come in a ton of different varieties. We will talk about those a lot as we get into DNA replication. And then the polymer, so the many amino acids combined together, are called a polypeptide. And they really do string themselves together in what you see here, where it literally looks like a string of beads, and then they fold up really intensely. And these amino acids in your polymers and your polypeptides, they are linked together by a peptide bond. So polypeptide are held together with peptide bonds. And they store about 4 calories per milligram, which you'll remember are carbs as well. But they have so many other uses that proteins are actually the last thing your body's going to break down if it needs energy. So you could eat like a 50-pound steak, but your body is going to put as much of that protein to use doing all these other functions in your body before it even thinks about touching them for energy. All right, so then because our proteins are just really long, essentially like beaded strings, kind of like you can think of like Mardi Gras beads, they don't float around like that because these peptide bonds may or may not be able to hold it together throughout your body as things are happening. So they all fold up. And the importance of folding is that however those beads essentially are folded up is going to tell the protein what its job is, which is really intense because like if you think about folding your clothes, you might fold your pants a different way than you fold your shirts. So we're talking about proteins deciding what they do based on if you fold it like a shirt or you fold it like pants. So the shape of the fold determines what the protein is actually going to do. Okay, so let's do a rundown of this page of notes before we move on to our last topic for this lecture. So we're still back on our lipids up here with our monomer and our polymer and our energy storage. You want to remember that we're using carbs first, then you're going to use your lipids. We skipped over phospholipids for now. And then proteins are super important. There is a ton there. So I wanted to make sure I knew the names of the functions that I have, but not really any more than that. Because if I ask for a function of protein, I can go find quickly these keywords. And if those keywords aren't an answer, I can make sure that the rest matches up. Then I also have that's found in meats and nuts. I feel like are going to be a really good example for me to know what proteins are found in. My monomer, my polymer, my polypeptide. So if I see the word polypeptide, then I can look at many, and then P goes with protein. And that they're held together with peptide bonds. I drew a little picture of a beaded string because that's what helps me remember what they look like. And that energy is used only if it's required. Then the importance of folding, I just highlighted form dictates function because that makes sense to me when I remember what was said in class. All right, so last but definitely not least are our nucleic acids. So the function of nucleic acids is to store and transmit genetic information. So this is where your DNA comes into play. This is important. So our examples are DNA and RNA, and you get them from your parents. You cannot just get DNA from food. That would be kind of cool and also kind of terrifying at the exact same time. So remember, this is the only macromolecule you do not get from food. So the structure of our nucleic acids, a monomer or a single piece of our nucleic acid is called a nucleotide. Now we have 5 different ones. We have A, G, T, C, and U, and we'll talk about those a lot more in depth when we hit DNA a little bit later on in the semester. They're made with 5 carbon sugars, a phosphate group, and then a nitrogen base. So every single one of those letters has a 5 carbon group, a phosphate group, or a 5 carbon sugar, a phosphate group, and a nitrogen base. Then when you combine them all together, you get your nucleic acid, and that makes your DNA and RNA. So energy storage of nucleic acids. You don't get any energy from your DNA. Your DNA has a lot of other things to do, like tell your body everything it has to do. So nucleic acids are never, ever broken down by your body because they don't have any energy and they're too important the way that they are. All right, so this slide was pretty easy, or this page was pretty easy. The main function and purpose, store genetic, is enough for me to remember what's going on, and I wrote down my examples because nucleic acid seems like a really complicated way to say DNA. Because remember, your DNA actually stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. So Na, Na. Your monomer, or your single building block of DNA, is called a nucleotide, and then your polymer is your many nucleotides put together into a nucleic acid, and it never, ever, 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 ever stores this for energy. So down below, you'll see the summary. They ask why each macromolecule is important and what would happen if one was missing. So I want you to write 2 to 3 sentences to answer those 2 questions, and then also watch the music video that I've linked and take additional notes down below if anything seems to make even more sense.